Our brains have one job and one job only, and that is to keep us safe. Every aspect of every day of your lives, your brain wants one thing only, and that is to say, is this person safe? Is this person that I'm in charge of safe? And are they okay, right? So as we talk tonight, I don't want you to really think about mental health in the aspect of positives and negatives, but I do want you to think about it in the aspect of, is my brain trying to keep me safe? Am I safe? And how do I tell it that I am safe and I'm in control of the situation? Okay? Because that's going to be a big thing when we start talking about wounds. So our mental health is shaped by a number of different aspects, and I'm going to simplify it a lot tonight. If you guys want to come back and talk about this more in depth, you can talk to Kevin. I'm sure he'll work it out. There's the biological aspect, and then there's the environmental aspect. Okay? So strictly speaking, biology, we are all born. There are genetics, there are genes, there is epigenetics, and we have certain biological traits that will lead us in a certain direction. It is then our environment, our homes, our schools, our churches, our friendships, that bring us to the peaks and valleys of what our biology allows, right? So, what that means is someone may be predispositioned to have more of a lean towards depression, right? But if they grow up in a situation and in an environment where there's a lot more positivity, things are understood more, things are communicated more, that predisposition that they have for depression doesn't hit as hard, right? So it's really important to consider that our environments do really contribute to how we view ourselves and to where our wounds are formed. So, it's also important to understand that everything that we consider mental health also includes our emotional health as well. And wrapped up in all of that, everything is on the spectrum, right? You can have severe, and you can have not so severe. But we're always on the spectrum for everything we do, and at different points in our lives, we're going to be on different ends of the spectrum with different things. So, we'll go way into that if I come back and talk about that. So, instead I want to focus on, I call it the coin, right, when I'm talking to my clients in therapy. And the coin is simply the idea of anxiety and depression. It's two sides of the same coin. And what anxiety and depression do is they impose safety on us, right? So a few minutes ago I said your brain wants to keep you safe, and that is its only job. And usually the way it does it is either by forcing us to do things or by keeping us in a mode where we're not doing anything, right? Fight or flight, go or stay, that's what we're looking at. So earlier today, I was watching the Kansas City game. Kansas City is winning, for anybody who wants to know. I'm like, oh, I have to get up and go give this talk tonight, right? Also, I have laundry in the dryer that I do need to fold. I didn't do the laundry at all. The laundry is still sitting in the dryer, and will still be there when I get home. Because my brain was like, well, wait a minute, you're watching the game. Why do you need to get up and go do something? Why move from this area of safety that you're in and go do something that you really don't want to do? It's not going to make you happy. You can stay here and watch the game. So that's what I did. Because my brain wants to keep me safe, and safety at that moment in time for me was watching a football game. Now, sometimes things happen where you have to appear somewhere and give a talk about something. So then I was like, oh, for me, safety is actually following through on a commitment and showing up somewhere, so I got to get in my car and drive, right? But in all of this, my brain was just trying to keep me safe. And that's all our brain is ever trying to do. So when we talk about core wounds, right, when we're looking at areas of reflection that maybe we have fears of abandonment or fears of rejection, sometimes those fears are simply there because our brain does want to keep us safe, right? All of you, all of us in this room, we have certain scripts about ourselves that we tell ourselves, right? Those scripts are those wounds that you guys have worked on and talked about and discovered. Sometimes it's a fear of abandonment, right? That if I'm not this person, then everybody's going to leave me or reject me. Sometimes it's fear of people are only going to like me if I'm the person they want to be, so I'm going to do everything for them and become this selfless saint, taking care of everybody else and neglecting myself. And in small doses, these aren't necessarily bad things, right? It's good to help other people out. You know, it's good to have certain healthy fears and anxieties. But when they get disordered, right, those strengths become weaknesses, and those weaknesses can lead into sin. So sin oftentimes is a result of overprotection. Now, I don't know, I used to be a Christian here years ago. Father Jack would often in his homilies say that sin was an old archery term from the Greek that means to miss a mark. Does he still say that? Have y'all ever heard that? Okay, good, because it's not true. So, at least what I found. But I went into like a really deep rabbit hole looking for this, because this is what I do. So, a lot of people say that the etymology of sin, right, is an old archery term that if you miss the bullseye, that is to sin, and you're just missing the mark. And really, it's a great terminology, but that's not really where it comes from. It comes from Aristotle and the word hamartia. Hamartia is sin in Greek. And what Aristotle said is that it is simply just missing the mark, right? And we're always trying to correct ourselves back to hitting the bullseye. So, when we are thinking about our core wounds, right? When we're thinking about the things that we know that hurt us, we can identify them, and we can be like, oh yeah, I do have that, and we can put a Band-Aid over it and move on with life. But here's the thing. If you have a wound, and you don't clean it well, and you just throw a Band-Aid on it, it's going to heal. But the infection is going to live underneath that scar tissue. And eventually you have to open that wound back up, clean it out again, and let it re-heal again, right? So the goal when we're thinking about our wounds, when we're thinking about our mental health and healing, is to really sit in the discomfort of that, so we can clean out that wound really well and let it heal appropriately. Now, it may not be a perfect healing every single time, but it is a healing nonetheless. So, I want to talk about shame and guilt. I'm going to broadly define shame and guilt, and then we can kind of get down into it a little bit if y'all want to. Shame is, let's start with guilt, because guilt's just easier, because we're all Catholic. So, guilt is simply the idea that what we did is bad, right? One of my favorite comedians, he has a whole series of a set just focusing on confession, and the object or the story he uses is that the person in the confessional poked a badger with a spoon, right? For the bit, it's funny right now. We're just going to use it as a reference because it's the first thing that came to mind. Poking a badger with a spoon is not necessarily sinful, but I guess if you do it to the same badger enough times, it could be considered sinful on some level. So, you poke a badger with a spoon, and then you feel bad for doing it, right? That is guilt. Now, shame is a little bit different, because shame is not about the action or the behavior we did. Shame is about who we are. When we talk about shame, what we're saying is, I am bad. Not the thing I did was bad. The wounds that we have will often tell us that we're bad. They'll often tell us to shy away or to not talk about things because it does keep us safe to be in that mode, right? And that's an important distinction, because when we feel shame, when we feel like we are bad for something we've done, we want to hide that away. One of my favorite stories when I talk about wounds and healing is that of Peter and of Judas, right? Judas betrayed God, betrayed Jesus because of what he said, because of his miracles, because of who he was. Judas betrayed him. Later on, after that betrayal, after the arrest, Peter denied God because of who he was. So both of them did something that was incorrect and wrong, right? But here's the difference between the two. When Judas betrayed Jesus, he did it with a kiss, and then he turned and he walked away, and he never looked at him again. Never turned around. Never said he was sorry. When Peter denied Christ, in that courtyard, on that third denial, he looked him in the eyes, and then he ran away crying. But in that moment, Peter knew what he had done was wrong, and he repented of it in that look, and that repentance came out in tears. So, in our mental health, we're going to have shame. We're going to think our wounds are bad. We don't want anyone else to know about it. So we keep those things in the dark, right? We keep those things in the recesses of our heart. Now, there's a lot of shame research in the last 15, 20 years. A lot of it is really, really good. And the thing that I want you to take away from it is simply this. If you identify your wounds. And if you identify the shame attached to them, that voice in your head that says, I'm bad because of this, and you shine a light on it, it starts to dissipate. Because shame does not like to be named, our wounds don't like to be seen. But if you shine a light on it, if you recognize them, and you can sit with them, they begin to lose the power that they had over you at the time. And that's really hard to do. It's hard for me to do as an adult, it's hard for me to do as a therapist. And I teach people about this all the time. I give advice on this quite frequently, and I still struggle with it too. And that's because we have this thing called denial. And denial is a great self-defense mechanism, because when something happens that we find extremely shameful or extremely painful, denial kicks in. And denial is there to stop the pain of what's happening from just overwhelming us and washing us away, right? So it is a great self-defense mechanism. However, if we stay in denial for too long, which we can do, it leaves us with an acceptable amount of pain. Not all the pain that we could be experiencing, but just enough pain that we're like, well, this isn't really comfortable, but I can handle this part of it, so I can stay here, right? And what this does is it keeps us in a mode of saying, well, I have a wound, but I really don't want to deal with it because dealing with it is going to be much, much harder than just leaving it alone. So I can stick with that one, right? And the reason that we stick with these wounds oftentimes is for no other reason than we love ourselves conditionally. I have to be the perfect son, the perfect daughter. I have to get an A on this test. I have to have high grades. Many other things that you might think of, right? All these things that we have to do, right? So we love ourselves with conditions. If I do this one thing, conditionally I'm okay, conditionally I will be loved, and this is a good thing, right? But if we call back to what Jesus said in the Bible, he said, love one another as you love yourselves, right? So if our goal is to love other people, we have to do it at the measure we love ourselves. We cannot fill from empty cups, so we always have to be full ourselves before we give out to others. And so this is why when we're looking at mental health, we really have to say, this is something that I need to really consider about who I am, and how do I work on it and work through it. So oftentimes, at this point, I actually will take questions, but I'm going to slow it down. I'm not going to because I'm on a timer, and I'm not really good at timers, which you guys are going to find out. I'm going to go over this 20 minutes, but I'll try to keep it well below that. But usually at this point, I'm going to ask you, what are the things that you're in denial about? What are the things that you think about your wounds? And how do you work on them, right? And a lot of times what I'm going to get back in feedback is a lot of quick responses. Well, I know that I'm lazy, so I just need to get up earlier and do something. Or I know that I don't study for tests, and so I need to start studying for tests ahead of time so I can get better grades, right? All these things are true, all these things are good. But here's the thing. Oftentimes what we're going to do is we're going to overthink a situation to try to get out of it. But when you're overthinking things, you're underfeeling them. I'll repeat that one more time because I think it's important. If you are overthinking something, you are underfeeling it. Mental health, emotional health, physical health, spiritual health, they work in unison, right? How we operate on each level and how they operate together is how we move forward to healing, right? It's how we heal our wounds. We have to examine them. We have to know what's there. We have to sit through the pain of that healing until we get out on the other side. And it's always a conversion, right? We're always going through these moments of conversion where the healing gets a little bit better. And it's easy to fall into denial. So, before we got started tonight, Ashley came up to me, she's like, hey, are you okay? I was like, yeah, I'm fine. And she's like, are you really okay? I was like, no, yeah, I'm really fine. Truth is, I'm not fine. I got some stuff going on. But my initial instinct was, oh yeah, I'm fine. It's no problem. I got this. But I'm denying my wounds, right? I'm letting that acceptable amount of pain enter in and working from it. And eventually I was like, oh yeah, I'm not fine. And this is why, right? Because it's always going to be a process. It's kind of like working out. If you guys work out at the gym, you go every day, It hurts, right? I did leg day today. Tomorrow's going to be really bad. But you keep on going through the process, right? You keep on going through the conversion of working out. So it's really important to know that you're not going to fix everything about you that you want to in day one. You never are, right? And you have to be careful with yourself because your voice, that inner voice that you have that says, well, I'm this and I'm that, yeah, it can be helpful, but it can also be hurtful. It can keep you just feeling negative about yourself. When we talk about mental health and negativity, our brain's like, well, they're saying they're bad, they're saying they're lazy, they're saying they don't study well enough. How do I make them feel good? They're saying that they don't help their friends enough. How do I make them feel safe? We're always going to find ways to negate the negative and say somewhere where it's mostly positive. Right? How much time do I have left, Kevin?
A minute.
I told you. Okay, so let me wrap this up in 5 minutes. People come into my office, they talk to me, they tell me things about their life, and I say, wow, that must be really tough. My job is not to judge people, my job is to walk with them through what they've been through. But I can only do so much as a therapist. If the people I'm working with don't take advice or don't take homework, advice is a really strong word. If they don't follow suggestions and they don't do homework, they're not going to move forward, right? My trainer tells me how to do kettlebell exercises and I don't do them the way he told me. There's going to be some progress, but not the progress that I'm looking for. So, for me, growing up, confession was always simply just a get in, venial sins, mortal sins, get out, penance, and then get out, and hope that the priest didn't recognize my voice because I'm going to go behind the screen. Right? And it was that way in my life for a very, very long time. The problem was that, well, there's lots of problems with that idea for me. The problem was like, it was simply like, this is how I've been bad, and now I hope God will forgive me and let me move forward. Now, I grew up in a very strict household where that messaging wasn't always great. So here's the thing I want you to remember. Earlier I talked about conditional love, loving ourselves conditionally. And what I want you to remember is, there's no conditions for God's love for you. At all. It doesn't matter. He loves you. When we go to confession, it is like going to therapy, it's like going to the gym. It is simply an opportunity for us to say, hey, these are my wounds, and these are how they're affecting me in my life, and how do I do some sort of exercise to move on from this, right? When I go to confession now, it is not simply about going in and saying, well, this is all the things I've done wrong, and I'm sorry for it. It's more about having a little bit of a conversation. Now, when you're standing in line, there's like 20 people behind you, you don't want to have a conversation because you know there's 20 people behind you. And you're probably thinking, well, I don't want them thinking I'm a terrible person being in here for 10 minutes. It doesn't matter what other people think. Just do what you need to do. The priest will tell you if you're taking too long. I guarantee you that. But what I want you to remember when you're in the confessional is it's a conversation, right? Forget that it's Father Jack or Father Flood or Father Pete up at Prince of Peace, wherever you go to confession. They're in that room in persona Christi, in the person of Christ. You are having a conversation with God to say, hey, these are the wounds that I've recognized. This is the thing that I'm struggling with right now, and this is how it's affecting me to miss the mark. And I just need help. It's not about perfection. It's not about doing it right. It's just about the conversation. So, St. Bernard of Clairvoyant, he's a doctor of the church. He has some really great teachings. And he had a vision of what it was like on Judgment Day. And I'm not saying that his way is the right way, but I do love this vision. He says, when people die, they will choose to either run towards God or run away from Him. When we talk about shame and feeling like we're bad and not having done things right, we don't want to just like start blurting out all the negative things about us to someone we just met. We're going to run away. But if through our lives we can learn to talk to our friends, our family, therapist, priest in confession, and start to know those wounds and know who we are, when that time comes, we can actually engage with people. Healing is going to take time. It is not it's not a one-off thing. It's a continual conversion of who we are. It's a continual understanding of, well, I have this wound, but now there's a different facet of it that I just realized, right? We're complex. Our lives are complex. Society is really complex. And as we try to move through it, we get hurt in different ways, and we don't always see those ways in which we will be hurt. The work you do now to understand your hurt, to understand that you have these scripts that may be negative, you can start to counteract them with the positive, right? Oftentimes when people come in, I have an activity I do called Boat Lighthouse Storm. You're in a boat, a storm hits, who's in the boat with you, how do you survive it, and what does the lighthouse mean? For me, the meaning is simply this, that life is the ocean and it is rough and we don't always know what's going on. We need something outside of ourselves that is not judgmental. Something outside of ourselves that is the guiding light. The lighthouse for me is always the glory of God. It's on the rock, it's a bright light, I can always head towards it, even when the boat's getting tossed and turned, even when I want to swim the other way, no matter what it is, I can say, well, you know what, this is me right now, but I see where I need to be. And I just need to keep on moving towards that, however slow or fast that is.